I'm really happy to be here in South Carolina, and I want to echo the previous person from Clemson who said, he didn't say this, but I would say ACSP needs to spend more time in the South. South Carolina is a beautiful state. And although some people have opinions about South Carolina based on a few politicians, let me tell you a story about someone else from South Carolina. Reverend J. Herbert Nelson from Orangeburg, South Carolina, is the current president of the National Presbyterian Church of America, the first black president in the history of the Presbyterian Church, 300 years in America, the first one. And before that, he ran a ministry of the homeless in Memphis, Tennessee for 13 years and built a movement across this country to provide economic justice, to fight for justice in our criminal justice system, in immigration justice. And on that platform and that movement, he was elected president of the national church. Since he was elected 2 years ago, 3 million people left the Presbyterian Church in America because they couldn't stand this movement. Donald Trump, by the way, is a Presbyterian from Queens. 8 million people stayed. And this is based on debates in churches across America. The 3 million tried to create a rival denomination, tried to strip the main denomination from its resources and failed. And 4 months ago, they petitioned to come back into the mainstream. And Reverend Nelson said, "Have you changed your philosophy?" They said, "No, but we have resources." He said, "Stay out. We don't need you back in the Presbyterian Church." So I just want to tell you, that's a South Carolinian leader we're not hearing about in the news. But I'm very proud and very excited about what's happening under Reverend Herbert Nelson's leadership. And it came right here from Orangeburg. I've been here 4 times in the last couple of years on behalf of a family friend, Reverend Leonard Smalls. Reverend Smalls inherited 80 acres in the Sea Islands, passed down from his great uncle, Captain Robert Smalls. Captain Robert Smalls had been a slave on a Confederate ship at the outbreak of the Civil War. When his Confederate masters went out to dinner one night, he organized 5 other slaves, and they stole the ship and sailed it behind Union Navy lines. Robert Smalls then led the Union ships through the backwaters of the Carolina coast. The Union was able to hold the coast throughout the entire war, and Robert Smalls became the first black commissioned officer in the history of the U.S. military. Towards the end of the war, Smalls led 2,000 black soldiers on a Navy ship into the Charleston harbor to free the city. Harriet Tubman sailed in front of the ship in a place of honor, and they liberated Charleston. But this isn't the end of the story. Robert Smalls bought land on the plantation where he had been enslaved, and he allowed the former plantation mistress, who had grown senile during the war, to live out her final years on the plantation, all the time thinking Robert Smalls was still her slave. Smalls then served in Congress 18 years and legislated the first public schools in the South. I like this story because it shows both sides of South Carolina. Incredible wrongs, but also incredible courage and grace. When Robert Kennedy was named U.S. Attorney General in 1961, it terrified the civil rights movement because Robert Kennedy had been Senator Joe McCarthy's attorney during the House on Un-American Activities investigations. Witch hunts, I should say. Martin Luther King decided that they needed to test Robert Kennedy's heart. And it was Reverend Leonard Smalls, the nephew of Captain Robert Smalls, and another South Carolinian named Reverend B.J. Whipper, who then suggested to King that they invite Robert Kennedy to the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, where Kennedy saw firsthand starving children. They then took Kennedy to Mississippi to see more starving children. This began Robert Kennedy's personal journey. By 1968, he was a different person, trying to take America to a higher moral ground. This was also the beginning of the Head Start program and where it came from. South Carolina epitomizes some of the worst things about this country, but also some of the best. When Dylan Roof killed 9 people in a Charleston church 4 years ago, which was horrible, the church people, families of the murdered, prayed for him. South Carolina showed the world the tortured soul of America, but it also showed our ability to forgive and to strive for higher ground, and the determination to unite all people, regardless of who you are or where you've come from or what you've done. This is the spirit of democracy, and it is and always will be the hope of America. I want to take this time to talk about the economic and social challenges we are facing. The US led the world in manufacturing for much of the 20th century, but by the end of the century, we lost that position to low-wage countries like China and to higher-end manufacturing countries like Germany. We then had an explosion in financial services and real estate. The finance industry once went from 7% of the economy to over 40% today. That explosion is over, and the benefits overwhelmingly went to the top of the income spectrum. In New York last year, 1% of the population earned over 40% of the income of all the workers in the city. Most New Yorkers, and I believe most Americans, are deeply concerned about the future of the economy and whether there's a place for them or their children in it. In New York, there's a parallel concern about the cost of living in the city. Despite our current mayor building more affordable housing than any previous administration by far, the affordable housing crisis continues to get worse. Many people feel they're being forced out of the city. It's not just the poor who feel threatened. It's the middle class and small businesses too. In the case of real estate, we ask ourselves, why is the affordability crisis so intractable? Low worker incomes, financial speculation, and distorted federal housing subsidies that favor the rich are all causes. But I want to draw attention to another cause that can't be fixed. We have a limited amount of land in New York, but our population has grown substantially and continues to. This means that when most land is private in quote-unquote free, unregulated markets, landlords can suck every family and every business dry. This is a problem we are experiencing in New York. But it's going to get worse all over the country and the world because the world population is growing and land is not. This raises a public question. How long can we continue to allow individual property owners to determine who gets to live in our centers of commerce, education, invention, and democracy? Because that's what cities are. This question is becoming more urgent every year, and citizens in New York, and I suspect elsewhere, are losing patience. I don't think planners can avoid engaging in the major political and cultural battles over this issue that are going to arise in coming years. Another mega issue is healthcare. The presidential candidates are focusing on the cost of health insurance, which is, of course, an immediate issue for millions of Americans. But this is not the most crucial issue in healthcare. The bigger issue is, why are we so sick? We are a very sick country, literally. That's why it costs so much to take care of us. Healthcare is approaching 20% of the economy in the nation, and 80 million baby boomers are becoming elderly. I'm a baby boomer. I know I'm becoming elderly. I don't think I'm almost elderly, but 80 million are becoming elderly. Baby boomers will live longer than old people did in previous generations, and they will need more care for a longer period of time. Most of this care will not be in institutions, but in their homes. One thing we know about home care, however, is that home care workers tend to be poorly paid and poorly trained. It's hard to convince an enterprising young person to want to become a home care worker, to dream of making $12 or $15 an hour. Although we will need many, many more home care workers in coming years. Another fact about home care is that because of poor training and lack of communication between doctors, nurses, and home care workers, the quality of home care is generally poor. Elderly people end up going to the emergency room, which is very expensive, or to the doctor's office, which is expensive, for things like taking a blood sample or removing a catheter that could have been done in their home if their home care worker were better trained. If we don't do a better job at delivering home care, the cost of taking care of baby boomers will truly become staggering. And you can forget about your dreams of housing and all these other things you want to do, because you will be paying for that to take care of your parents or your grandparents or your loved ones. Revolutionizing home care is therefore something the nation badly needs. We can do it by training home care workers better, by paying workers better, and creating ladders of opportunity from home care to other jobs in healthcare, and by introducing telemedicine and other teamwork approaches between clients, home care workers, nurses, and doctors. We're working on this in New York. Others are too. All of this saves money by keeping patients out of emergency rooms and nursing homes. It will be the largest source of job growth in New York and across America. And if they're good jobs, they will lift people out of poverty. If we go where we're going now, it's a disaster. A second piece of healthcare is Medicaid, health insurance for low-income people. New York State spends $82 billion a year on Medicaid. The nation spends $600 billion a year on Medicaid. Most of that money goes to hospitals to take care of people after they get sick. Not a lot goes to prevention, to keeping people healthy and out of the hospital in the first place. This doesn't make sense. When you look at health data, about 85% of health outcomes depend on non-medical factors like food, exercise, stress levels, and the environment. The greatest risks for stress levels and for bad health generally are unemployment, poverty, and lack of stable housing. It's stressful to be poor. Poverty makes people sick. And we all pay the cost of poverty on the back end through government programs like Medicaid. Yet, increasing employment, access to healthy food, affordable housing, and community safety, all these things help people in communities while also happening to save money in Medicaid. So why aren't we investing in these things? Well, when it will not only help people, it will save money. The answer, I think, is in the way we think about poverty and fiscal discipline and economic efficiency in this country. We tend to counterpose fiscal discipline to helping poor people, as if poor people are lazy and irresponsible and will only become more so if we invest in them. We counterpose equality with economic efficiency. The more society becomes equal, supposedly, the less economically efficient we will be. Neither of these things is true empirically. Countries like Germany are far more equal than we are in terms of income and social goods, and yet they are more efficient. Countries that are more equal are also far healthier, physically and mentally, and pay far less in healthcare than we do. I think our attitudes in the United States are still rooted in our slave and segregated past, where we needed this kind of ideology to justify our kind of inequality, based on stigmatizing, starving, and abusing groups of people deemed inferior or losers. We need to get past this if we want to change and improve our cities. I believe planning students need to be taught the politics and history behind our public policies so that they can deconstruct and change them when they are holding us back. We're trying to do this. We're trying to do this in New York. Mayor de Blasio challenged this way of thinking about criminal justice. He ended the previous mayor's stop and frisk policy, which stopped and frisked 6 million mostly black and brown young men over 12 years and created a siege condition or police state kind of mentality across the city. Stop and frisk is now down over 90%, actually down 98%. And there were 150 fewer arrests in New York City last year than before. There was much more attention put into neighborhood policing and crime prevention programs. What happened? Crime went down. Our murder rate hasn't been this low since 1942. The idea that, as Giuliani said, criminals are criminals. There's no point trying to help because they are what they are. As opposed to that, we've shown in practice that's a lie. Now, by the way, if you want to find money to invest in poor communities, you might start with Medicaid. Many hospitals around the country are beginning to leverage their Medicaid-fueled purchasing power to create jobs locally. That is, to make things locally that they now buy from all over the world. City procurement offices can do the same thing. Some states are experimenting with using Medicaid dollars to address upstream social causes of bad health, such as allowing doctors to literally prescribe housing for mentally ill, homeless patients. This is not only humane, it not only helps the patients, it creates more jobs in construction and other things, and it saves Medicaid money at the same time. And I would just say that health professionals more and more are coming to embrace social determinants of health and a prevention mentality, but they don't know how to do it because they're not trained in planning. So there is a big market for planners who actually know how to address social determinants of health, and there are mega budgets for this in Medicare and Medicaid that planners have not begun to tap. I'm just putting that out there. A third mega issue is digital technology. We are all aware of the disruptive changes brought about by computers and smartphones. But the greatest impact of digital technology is just emerging. that is computer-aided manufacturing and artificial intelligence. If government and citizens sit back and let the finance community and tech geeks shape the future of the tech economy all by themselves, and I've taught a lot of tech geeks at MIT, that's not who you want planning the future of cities, I would just say. No, good kids, but if you let these folks plan the future of the tech economy all by themselves, automation will become bad news for lower skilled workers and low income workers. Millions of jobs will be lost. Robots are already stocking shelves in Amazon and other big box warehouses. Bank tellers, rental car and hotel clerks, all these kinds of jobs that essentially involve routines are vulnerable to replacement. On the other hand, tech could become a powerful force to improve jobs and quality of life. Auto companies are exploring changing their entire production model, given that they're moving to battery engines. They're thinking of making cars close to where people buy them. An electric car is essentially a battery, probably a carbon fiber body, and component parts. So they're kits, you can just put them together. This opens up room for all kinds of car sizes and designs, and can also allow customers to custom design their vehicles and have them produced right where they are. Traditional auto factory jobs will decline, mostly outside the US, but the local demand for car designers and for computer-savvy production workers, manufacturers, will go way up. Shoes and many other consumer products will follow a similar path of local design and production. The workers in these places will be technicians and designers rather than assembly line workers. The proliferation of smart cars and autonomous vehicles might soon lead to AI taking over traffic management from street lights and stop signs. Actually, I was in my cousin's Tesla 2 weeks ago, and we were at Bed Bath & Beyond, and he called the car to come from the parking lot and come meet him in front. And the dog was still in the car and totally freaked out, like what was going on. And the car only made it 3/4 of the way, and then it got lost. But with online access to cars and scheduling routes, autonomous vehicles could eventually eliminate the need for a private car for many people who could simply share rides. This could in turn open up cheaper transport, far less traffic, and less dependence on buses or light rail. These things are on the horizon. I think it's vitally important for cities and the public to have a hand in shaping the future tech city and not sitting back and letting industry decide what the future of cities will look like. If Google owns the AI infrastructure for traffic management, we'll have the same problem we'll have with a few property owners owning all the land in cities now. That is, they'll charge the hell out of everybody to drive down the street or to go over a bridge, and you'll have no choice. Ford Motor Company and every other motor company will then be working for Google. AI is the new infrastructure for cities. It's like roads and bridges. How in the world can we let the private sector own that and the city, the public, not have a say in what this is going to look like and how it's going to roll out? But that's where we are right now. With the right strategies and investments, a tech economy could mean that good jobs replace bad jobs and not that tech creates mass unemployment. Not all of the innovation needed, by the way, is in engineering and science. For tech to help communities rather than decimate them, we need to innovate in ownership structures. New municipal co-ownership, worker ownership, and community ownership structures need to be developed. Why? Because an investor-owned company is likely to use robots to lay off workers so as to increase dividends for investors. whereas a worker-owned or a municipal co-owned company will have other incentives, like using the savings from robots to upskill workers and transition them into other kinds of needed work. Local university business and law schools and planning schools could develop expertise in these areas. At the same time, cities move in this direction through their procurement policies. We are starting to move in this in New York. We have 40,000 manufacturing jobs and 400 manufacturing workers left in New York City. These are good jobs. They pay over $70,000 a year for workers with a high school diploma. Over 60% of the owners don't have a succession plan, and most of them are baby boomers who are going to retire soon. Rather than see these jobs disappear, we're setting up programs to help workers take over ownership and learn how to manage these companies. And step 2 will be helping these workers transition to computer-aided manufacturing so they are positioned for what's coming ahead in the realm of advanced manufacturing. Another thing we're doing is integrating our education and workforce and our summer youth job programs along career pathways so that we can upskill our young people beginning before kindergarten and lasting beyond college. Good jobs in the future will require more skills and training across the board. But what kind of skills? It's not just teaching young people how to code. The revolutionary thing about AI and robotics is that it tells machines to do much of the routine work that humans now do. In this sense, it supersedes the very thing Adam Smith and Emil Durkheim thought was the genius of capitalism, its ability to divide labor and coordinate human labor to maximize production. Now, machines will do most of that basic labor in the near future. What then will humans do? Humans will do what machines can't do very well: problem solve across silos, imagine new things, care for one another, and care for the planet. These skills involve teaching young people how to identify hidden problems, how to work in groups with people coming from different backgrounds, how to be creative and implement new ideas, and how to have empathy. Most of our educators themselves were not trained in this way and don't know how to train students in this way. So this won't be a quick fix in our schools. But our public schools chancellor, our City University of New York chancellor, our youth and workforce teams, and me, we're all working collaboratively exactly on this. A third area I want to mention is climate adaptation. Climate science is not perfect. Science is not perfect by definition. But it's a whole lot better than superstition or flying blind, which is what our national government is doing vis-a-vis climate change. According to climate scientists, sea levels are going to rise by 6 feet or more by the end of this century, and it could happen sooner. Our storms are likely to become more intense and dump lots more rain. The MIT climate scientist, John Fernandez, tells me, Senor Menendez, that Puerto Rico and other islands in the Caribbean will experience 200-mile-an-hour plus storms every year, beginning within 10 years. There are a number of issues that have to be dealt with to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. Energy efficiency is one. Buildings use more carbon than anything else, any other part of our economy. We can reduce our carbon use as well as hold down energy costs by retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency. In most cases, energy savings can pay for the cost of these retrofits. Retrofitting work can create a lot of jobs, and Con Ed, which is our state utility in New York, is already starting this in the Bronx. We already have recent legislation in New York introducing this. It's only going to become much more. We have to do 900,000 buildings in New York City alone. We will also need to build infrastructure, a massive amount of infrastructure, of various types to deal with rising sea levels. In New York, we have 520 miles of sea, ocean, land, ocean coast. more than Seattle, LA, San Diego, Miami, Norfolk put together. We are already late in planning for ocean rise, and you can't build this kind of infrastructure overnight. This work, too, will create a lot of jobs. But like with tech, these jobs will go to workers who are well-trained and educated. Young people need to know if they work hard and study hard, they can have a great future building America green. And if we do this job training, literally, we can eliminate poverty in New York and other cities because the amount of work that needs to get done is that large. We already discussed baby boomers, but I want to raise another demographic. The United States will, in 2 or 3 decades, become majority Latino, Black, and Asian in terms of ethnicity. The workforce will become majority of color much sooner. This transition has already occurred in more than 80% of large and medium-sized cities in America. Soon, no racial or ethnic group will be a majority. This means that the future of the US economy, the future of cities, the future value of real estate, the solvency of Social Security, all these things depend, more than on any other factor, on the future of young people of color who are concentrated in our cities. This should ring alarm bells for everybody, given what's happening in cities across the country. President Trump said the city of Baltimore is a rat-infested hell. But Baltimore is not an outlier. The problems Baltimore has, Philadelphia has, New York has, Chicago has, Los Angeles has, Houston has, Miami has, Cleveland has. We all have. If Baltimore is hell, then America is hell. Our educational system is now ranked 28th in the world in math and science, behind most of Europe and industrialized Asia. We used to be at the top. Given that education and training are key to succeeding in healthcare or in tech or the green economy, we are not poised for success. We need to make radical investments in our young people, especially those we invest in the least. These are the people who will soon become our workforce. If investing in our young people is a bad investment, if investing in Baltimore and other cities are bad investments, then America is a bad investment, and we might as well give up and go live somewhere else. I think Trump thinks the solution is moving into one of his luxury condos or golf courses. But these are nothing more than golden prisons. The rats and roaches are going to get in there too. Trump hasn't presented a vision for solving America's problems or creating a vibrant future. His strategy has been to divide Americans and to drag up our worst demons of racism, sexism, and xenophobia. I think we have 2 problems here. The first is that around 40% of Americans still support Trump, even now. We need to ask ourselves, what is it that our civic institutions have been doing wrong so that 40% of Americans in the world's oldest democracy are willing to abandon democracy or even don't know that they're abandoning democracy? This is a far deeper problem than Trump the individual. Because if we don't fix this underlying problem, we might get something worse than Trump in the years ahead. The second problem is that we actually need the federal government. Cities don't have the tools the feds have, like the power of taxation or control of the currency. We need to rebuild our national infrastructure green and not have Congress dominated by carbon money. We need more national investment in science and education. Cities like New York will do all we can, but we need federal support and cooperation. Fortunately, help is on the way. And I want to say this in the memory and spirit of Elijah Cummings. Elijah Cummings' heart was with the people of Baltimore and the nation. He had faith in the little people. Over 2,000 years ago, a Jewish prophet had a similar faith. His follower Matthew recorded him as saying, "Clothe the naked, feed the hungry, house the homeless, free the prisoner. And as you do unto the least of them, so do you unto me." The prophet had faith in the little people. Unless we have faith and love for the people of our cities, we will not have the imagination or the will to change our cities. Elijah Cummings understood that our entire system of democracy is based on faith in little people and love of the people. This is what made America the radical experiment it still is. You could disagree with Elijah Cummings' opinions, but you could not disagree with his heart. Congressman Cummings saw something rising in America that Martin Luther King saw too from a further distance. Across America, a young generation of white people, I call them a new ethnic group, has embraced cities and chosen to move into diverse cities with all of their racial diversity and religious diversity and diversity in lifestyles. 80% of these young white people even voted for a black candidate for president twice. This is quite remarkable in a country not too far out of racial segregation. And I say that because I remember racial segregation in the South. I remember having to get off the train in DC and move into a segregated car before coming further down south to see family. It hasn't been that long ago. This is a country where a majority of white voters have not voted for a Democrat for president, much less a black candidate, since the Civil Rights Acts were passed in 1965. When you combine these younger white urbanites with urban people of color, one can discern a tidal wave rising, a whole different kind of climate change. This is a wonderful and hopeful thing for democracy. It is young people who have always fought hardest for democracy. And we need inspired young people to ensure a prosperous future for America. The demographic climate change is actually what a lot of the fighting in our political system is about right now. AOC is from New York. But we have a lot of AOCs in elected office right now, and their numbers are growing. There are similar movements happening across the country. We saw Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Andrew Gillum in Florida, Beto in Texas. We saw a gay woman elected mayor of Salt Lake City in Utah. We saw a Democrat elected to the Senate in Alabama by black women. What's radical is not their agendas, at least not yet. AOC's proposals really aren't that radical. Her Green New Deal isn't as radical as FDR's New Deal was. Hubert Humphrey called for a federally guaranteed right to a decent job for every American, federally guaranteed, in the 1960s. Nothing AOC or Bernie has said is as radical as what Hubert Humphrey called for. What's radical and jarring for people like Trump is that AOC is a 28-year-old Latina woman, and she's the one who's daring to say this stuff. The home care issue is similar. Upgrading home care workers makes perfect policy sense. The problem is that 90% of the workers are women, often of color, and it's women who are demanding training and good pay. The assumption of capitalism from the beginning was that work that doesn't make money, reproductive work like raising children, making dinner, taking care of the sick and disabled, would be done by women or by slaves for free. That was the assumption. Go back and read it. Read Adam Smith. Now that women demand equality, and that ex-slaves had freed themselves, we say we can't afford to pay home care workers. But the real problem is not that, because actually that would save us money. The real problem is adjusting to the demands of a genuine, inclusive democracy. That is the problem we're having right now. So here we are. What should planning educators be doing at a time like this? Number one, I think we need to teach students and ourselves the connection between planning and politics. Our inability to build racially integrated and class integrated cities and towns helped create Trumpism. Our complicity in allowing corporate finance to dominate housing and real estate helped create the crisis of affordability. Our lack of genuine civic media to ensure sensible and informed discussion of the myriad challenges facing our nation has been a breeding ground for confusion, disinformation, and even fascist elements gaining followings. Locking up tens of millions of urban Americans, mostly for minor drug offenses, with no rehabilitation or jobs when they come out, has had consequences for our democracy. Union busting for 4 decades has had consequences for our democracy. Privatizing key functions of government to the advantage of big money has had consequences for our democracy. Our job as urban planners, number one, is to understand what it means to build democracy in the flesh, in the day-to-day fabric of all of our institutions and policies that create the environment we live in and shape social interactions on a daily basis. By and large, we have not done that. The problems of America are not all Trump's fault or the fault of the corporations or the fault of a single political party. Democracy is nonpartisan, but it is not neutral to injustice. Democracy means fighting for the rights and inclusion of the little people over and against all kinds of aristocracies. We have to train our students how to do this so that planning can be relevant at this juncture in our history. Number two, we need to help the rising tide of progressive young political leaders and legislators. And I mentioned AOC, but there are many more. And I got to tell you, these are courageous young people who are not arrogant. They are not humble. They are saying, we are doing the best we can. We know there are things we don't know. Help us. We need to help them craft plans and programs to effect the changes they want to make. This means we need to invite them to our campuses or go see them and offer to help with their planning and decision making. Sitting in your classroom and complaining about this or that politician, their ideas or their plans are bad, that is not good enough. That is a cop-out. Many of these folks are gaining power, and with your help, they can legislate plans and projects that can restore people's faith in democracy and in the idea that government really does and can serve the people. Most importantly, planners need to stand up and fight for our values. For my staff, finding 300 children, now 700, 9 months to 10 years old, in a kind of warehouse in Harlem, separated from their parents at the Texas border, without decent food or clothing, without toys or dolls, without adults allowed to comfort or hold them. This changed my staff and made them fighters. They know we are in a struggle for our most basic principles as a society, as a nation, as human beings. As academics, we are also in a fight for the meaning of truth, the very essence of our professions, for the value of science itself. The climate deniers are science deniers and truth deniers. The proponents of fake news also say the courts are fake when they make decisions they don't like. The deniers undermine the belief that it is possible to have a system of government and cooperative living that is anything more than the assertion of naked self-interest, and language is either for promoting or disguising self-interest. The philosopher Hegel said that these were the traits of a dehumanized society. The deniers are trying to crush the very soul of our democracy. It is no surprise that dictators the world over are celebrating. That's where we are. But we've been here before. 160 years ago, right here in South Carolina, slave owners were saying, democracy doesn't apply to black people and it doesn't apply to women. Social media at the time was mainly the church. So much of the debate centered on whether God intended for all people to be created equal. The abolitionists said that God loved most the marginalized, the oppressed, and the meek. The slave owners said what the abolitionists were spreading was fake religion, the fake news of their day. When the Civil War concluded, 125 Union soldiers marched in jubilation down the streets of Washington, D.C. They sang a song as they marched that commemorated the great white abolitionist, John Brown, and what they called God's truth, which was about the common humanity and equality of all people. The song they sang is called the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It went like this: John Brown's body lies a-moldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so true. He frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, they themselves the traitor crew, but his soul goes marching on. As he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Let us stand up and fight for truth. Let us stand up and fight for an inclusive and caring democracy. Let us beat back wannabe dictators and the new aristocrats. Let us lift the spirit of the abolitionists, of Martin Luther King, of Robert Kennedy, and all those martyrs who prepared us for this moment. Let us join 16-year-old Greta Thunberg and the hundreds of thousands of young people who marched down the streets of New York last month for a sustainable planet. Let us support the school children from Florida who want to live without fear of automatic rifles in their schools. Let us make planning a do-something profession and a proud profession of the people, for the people, and by the people. Thank you.